Hello and welcome to Truly Timeless Failures, episode 5. Because every failure in history started with good intentions. Diplomacy is the art of keeping nations out of trouble. This week, we look at 4 stories that show us what happens when this art turns into a mess. Let's kick things off with the Treaty of Versailles. Signed in 1919 after the World War I, the Allied powers basically decided to punish Germany into the ground. The treaty required Germany to make territorial concessions, extradite alleged war criminals, recognize independence of states that were part of the German Empire, and basically accept that they were responsible for causing the war and consequently pay reparations for the damage caused by the war. I mean, what could go wrong with humiliating an entire country? That country being Germany. Germany's territory was stripped off, their economy tanked, obviously, resentment brewed, and this diplomatic peace treaty pretty much set the stage for World War II. The funny thing is that despite everything that happened and all the unfavorable terms against Germany, some Allied figures thought Germany was treated too leniently. Talk about being brutal. The Treaty of Versailles proves that if you want peace, just push someone till they break and humiliate an entire nation. Works every time, till it doesn't. Subscribe if you're with me so far before we move on to the next story. Now let's head to 1938 for one of the most notorious examples of failed diplomacy, the Munich Agreement. Picture this: Adolf Hitler is rising to power, building an army and eyeing more land for Germany. So he demands a piece of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, claiming that it's for the German people. That's a fair ask so far, considering it's Hitler. Britain and France are desperate to avoid another war, so they decide on a bold new strategy. Give Hitler exactly what he wants. Again, fair so far, considering it's Hitler. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flies to Munich, meets with Hitler and hands over the Sudetenland on a silver platter, thinking this sacrifice will guarantee peace in our time. Too bad nobody told Hitler that. He took the land and then went ahead and started World War II anyway. Classic Hitler. To summarize, imagine giving the school bully your lunch money to avoid getting hit, but instead the bully takes your money, then steals your backpack for good measure and punches you anyway. I'm sure this happened to a lot of you. No? Only me? Okay, cool. The Munich Agreement proves that when a dictator asks for a piece of your lunch, just give it to them. They'll totally stop being a bully after that. Promise. Subscribe real quick as we move on to the Bay of Pigs. Let's fast forward to 1961 and talk about the Bay of Pigs, or as I like to call it, the invasion that wasn't. Here's the story. Fidel Castro had recently come to power in Cuba, and the US was not thrilled about a communist regime setting up shop just 90 miles from Florida. The United States and the CIA solution? Call this mission the Bay of Pigs. I have no idea why. Train a small army of Cuban exiles, sneak them into Cuba, and overthrow Castro. Easy, right? Except, no. The US government assumed the Cuban people would rise up and join the fight against one of their own. But in reality, they did nothing, and Castro's forces were ready and waiting. Within 3 days, most of the invaders were either captured or killed, and the whole plan was a humiliating disaster for the US. So much for covert ops. It's like if you try to sneak into a party to kick the host, but everyone else at the party actually likes the host, and they just laugh when you're dragged out. The Bay of Pigs proves that if you're planning an invasion, maybe, just maybe, make sure you don't let the guy you're invading know that you're coming. Subscribe before we move to the next Cuban story, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Still sticking with Cuba, let's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So after the whole Bay of Pigs fiasco, Cuba got cozy with the Soviet Union. In response, the Soviets decided it would be a great idea to place nuclear missiles in Cuba, basically right on the US's doorstep. When American spy planes caught a glimpse of these missiles, the US freaked out and everyone was suddenly on the brink of nuclear war. For 13 days, the US and Soviet Union engaged in the world's most intense staring contest. President Kennedy set up a naval blockade around Cuba, daring the Soviet ships to cross it. The world held its breath as two superpowers dared each other to make the first move. Finally, both sides agreed to back down. The Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba, and the US quietly agreed to remove their own missiles from Turkey. All's well that ends well, right? Luckily, everyone backed down, but make no mistake, this could have been the world's worst staring contest with very expensive casualties of war. This incident was also widely portrayed in a lot of movies, including a very non-fictional take in X-Men First Class, which blends mutants and this story. Talk about tragedies. The Cuban Missile Crisis proves that sometimes bullies be bullying with strong AF weapons. Like, share and subscribe if you like the story so far. Truly Timeless Failures will return next week.